This week on Just Solutions, thousands of climate justice advocates and Indigenous leaders from around the country are mobilising in Washington, D.C. this week for the People versus Fossil Fuels protests. They're demanding that President Biden declare a climate emergency, that he ban new fossil fuel leases on public lands, and that he ends subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. Our guest today is Sharon Lavigne, winner of the 2021 Goldman Environmental Prize for North America, for her grassroots work that successfully stopped the construction of a $1.25 billion plastics manufacturing plant alongside the Mississippi River in St. James Parish, Louisiana. Her work continues as she battles yet another proposed petrochemical plant in her community. Sharon Lavigne is in Washington, D.C. this week to participate in the People versus Fossil Fuel protests. From Free Speech TV, Just Solutions. Sharon, it's great to have you with us. As I said, you're in Washington, D.C. this week, along with thousands of other people. What is happening? What are you hearing on the streets? Who has shown up to have their voices heard?
So many people across the United States are there. Alaska, Texas, Mexico, you name it. So many Indigenous people, so many American people. Everybody look like they're out there. Different organizations. It's a whole lot of people.
And as you mentioned, they're Indigenous people, people of colour, in fact, Indigenous leaders, BIPOC folk, Black, Brown, low-income people who are living through the very direct impacts of the climate crisis, but who are also experiencing the direct harms of fossil fuel exploitation. And that's exactly what your community in Louisiana has been dealing with. And that is why your work in that community has been recognised by the prestigious Goldman Environmental Award. Tell us exactly how you got involved, because you haven't always been all your life an environmental advocate, but you have certainly stepped into that space. So take us through how and why you became such a strong advocate and leader in your community in Louisiana.
Well, I became a strong leader, not by choice. It just happened. It happened overnight. When I was involved in an organization called HELP, Humanitarian Enterprise of Loving People. That's where I learned about what was going on in my community. I really didn't know. I was teaching school and I worked. I just worked and I went to church and that was it. And then when I joined the organization, I didn't know we had so many people sick with cancer and asthma. And I didn't know all of the chemical plants that were in St. James. And I really didn't know about Cancer Alley until we heard about Wan wanting to come into St. James on the East Bay. And we spoke up. We went to parish council meetings, and I learned about all these chemicals that was being emitted in our community and about the chemicals that was dumped into our drinking water. I found out all of that in that short time. And then in 2018, our governor announced that Formosa Plastics was coming in. And I don't know, it did something to me because it looked like no one was trying to fight industry. And so I asked the organization to let's fight this plant. And they said no because the governor approved it. And they said that it was a done deal. And they said that we couldn't fight it. And they said a parish council was going to approve it. And so I felt hopeless. I felt like these people kept telling me that. And I just knew in my heart that something just had to be done. And they told us that eventually we would have to sell our home, we'd have to move out because industry is taking over. And I felt like my grandparents worked for this land, my daddy, and why would I have to sell? Why would I have to leave to let industry come in? So that didn't set good with me at all. I couldn't sleep at night. All I thought about where I would have to go. And then as I started to learn more about it, I found out I had autoimmune hepatitis in 2016. Then I started reading about it, and it said it came from industrial pollutants. And so I don't know, it just made me pray. It made me pray harder and ask God what I should do. And that's when he told me to fight. And he changed me at that moment. He put a fight in me that I can't even explain. It's just beyond my explanation. And he changed me to what I am today, an environmentalist. I didn't even know anything about being an environmentalist. I didn't know anything about fighting the chemical plants, but he drove me into what I am today.
I think when we see folks like yourself showing up in Washington, D.C., who are coming from communities that aren't professional organizers, that don't have a history of this, that are literally out there fighting for the very lives of their communities, that it's so important that we share those stories. And we'll talk more about how you did organize your community and the huge success that you have, because in fact, you stopped that Huanhua plant. There's a second plant, a Formosa Plastics plant, Taiwanese-based company, that is also now being fought by your organization. It's in a bit of a stalemate. I believe the Army Corps of Engineers is requiring more environmental impact statements that will delay things. But this is a constant battle for communities just like yours. And so to just describe exactly what Cancer Alley is, it's this like 80-mile stretch around the Mississippi in Louisiana. And it's a massive, massive industrial complex. I think about 150 petrochemical or refineries there, with so many incidences of cancers, and it's disproportionately impacting the people of color. So take us through exactly who lives in Cancer Alley and who is living through the very real consequences of these petrochemical processing plants right there.
Well, in Cancer Alley, just like you said, it's an 85-mile stretch between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And it's so many chemical plants, especially on the river, because they need that river to transport their products. And it's heartbreaking to tell you how many people have died of cancer and a whole lot of other illnesses. And if you ride on the river road from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, you will run into a whole lot of chemical plants and refineries. And it just, you have to come out here and see it for yourself, because just telling you about it, you wouldn't think it's as bad as I'm telling you. But if you cross the Sunshine Bridge, you will get a whiff of the chemicals in the air.
And you can taste it. I
Yes,
have
you
actually
can.
been there, and you can taste it. It's so
Yes,
pervasive. You
yes,
smell it, you taste it, you
yes,
feel it. It burns your eyes.
yes. And if you come here and you stay in St. James where the chemical plants are for 2 hours, you will either leave with a headache or some kind of stomach ache. And for example, my daughter would get up in the morning to go to work. She would leave about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and she would kept going to the doctor for strep throat, sore throats and stuff. And come to find out, she was passing in front of these chemical plants, and that's what made her sick. She had to move to another neighborhood because she was always getting sick. So it's heartbreaking to know that your family can't even stay in St. James because of industry.
Well, you're in Washington, D.C. as part of the People versus Fossil Fuels mobilization. It's happening all week. Why are you there? Why are you part of this nationwide? In fact, it's an international mobilization. There are First Nation people there from Canada, people from Mexico. Why have you gone there this week, Sharon?
Because I wanted to speak to President Biden, and I was hoping that I could give him 113,000 signatures from people across the country that signed the petition asking President Biden to stop the buildup of Formosa plastics in St. James Parish. and I haven't seen him yet. I was told he's in Delaware in his hometown. And I was hoping I could give the petitions to one of his aides or someone. So I haven't been successful with that at all.
And who are you meeting on the streets? You mentioned earlier, these are Indigenous leaders, people from all over the country, all over North America, Canada, and Mexico. But are these similar communities than, as St. James Parish, people fighting the very real impact of fossil fuel extraction or processing in their communities? Who are you speaking to on the streets?
To a whole bunch of organizations, different organizations that's there, and mostly are Indigenous people. And the stories that they're telling is heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking how they live in there, and the president won't help them. And it's hurtful to me just to hear the stories. And I know it's hurting them to hear my stories also. But I've learned so much about these people and their country and their organizations and their fight. It's heartbreaking. If you would come out there and just listen to them speak, it's heartbreaking. It really is.
I think it's so important to share the work that you have done in St. James Parish in Louisiana, that the work that was recognized by the Goldman Environmental Prize, a very, very prestigious international award, because it's a success story. And we don't often share the success stories of grassroots activism going up, not just against major corporations, but also going against the government and policymakers, because as you said, the governor had approved that plant. And so when you first started that battle, you were saying there that people in the community said, there's no point, it's already been approved.
That's right.
You had to battle so many different layers, but you were successful. And we don't often share those success stories that can spur potentially or inspire other communities. You had several battles to fight, but what would you say and what do you say to other communities facing similar issues and facing those similar barriers, going up against big corporations with very deep pockets, but also government officials that are trying to fast track and give permits to these massive industrial fossil fuel processes?
I tell other people to stand up and speak for what's right. If something is coming into your neighborhood and it's not right, speak up. Find out, get all your facts together and speak up against it. Give your community the information. Have meetings, town hall meetings, and explain to your community what's going on, because they don't know, just like I didn't know. If I would have known this plant had bought our high school, if I would have known back then, I would have spoke up then. But the members of the Help Association said that they didn't want to fight it. But I wasn't a member then when they said that. When I found out our high school was sold, it was already sold. But with Wan Wan and Formosa, it wasn't built, and it wasn't Wan Wan, the permit was not approved then. So that gave us an edge on what we were trying to do. But the Formosa permit, it was approved after we formed Rise St. James. And we thought our public officials would vote no for it, but they voted yes. So that make it harder for us to fight Formosa Plastics. But we're going to fight it. I don't care what the parish officials say. We're not going to live here and be polluted anymore. This is where it stopped. Just like I told them back in 2018, this is the stop. You will not build anymore in St. James.
When you look at the political representation in Louisiana, in your community, you don't see the people who are living there being fully represented. I mean, you don't see people of color in these elected offices, the ones that are permitting these plants to come in. As I said, it's mostly African Americans, it's communities of color that are bearing the brunt of the toxicity of what's being emitted from these plants. And so when we're seeing right now efforts to further disenfranchise voters of color who are already disenfranchised in their communities. And there's a direct connection to what's happening right now with the climate crisis, and also what's happening with trying to further disenfranchise voters with all of these anti-voting laws that we're seeing being passed. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that we should get together as a people and change these laws. I think uh, instead of having all these public officials make laws for us, let some of the citizens get on board with making these laws, and let's change the laws, because that's our rights. We have a right to change things. We have a right to protest peacefully. We have a right to say what we think should or shouldn't be. And the elected officials that's not listening to us, we should vote them out.
Well, we'd love to hear from viewers. Let us know where you're watching right now. Let us know your thoughts on what's happening this week in Washington, D.C. Thousands of people, led by Indigenous leaders, people of colour, working class communities, bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, but also bearing the brunt of the other aspects of fossil fuel extractions, the petrochemical industry, the toxicity that is pervasive now in water and air in so many communities. Where are you watching? Are you impacted by this? And let us know your thoughts. Sharon, the connection to the climate crisis with what's happening in St. James Parish and Cancer Alley and fossil fuel extraction. You're dealing with chemical companies, but they're directly linked to the fossil fuel industry. These are petrochemicals. But those factories in and of themselves, the Formosa plant, it's estimated it would release 13 million tons of greenhouse gases into the air every single year. Yes. So in addition to the toxic chemicals that are causing all the illnesses, the cancer, you have the greenhouse gases that are being further emitted into the atmosphere, as well as that they're extracting fossil fuels to create these chemicals. It really is all connected. Do you think we have enough of a concept of the connectivity between all of these things? Or do you think people are just thinking of the climate crisis in an abstract way, but not seeing these direct connections?
I don't think they see these direct connections. I think that they see these chemical plants, they don't realize the effects of these plants. They know a little bit, but not enough to be worried about it. And they don't associate the industries with the hurricanes and the storms. They don't associate that with that. They just think that these things just happening. But it's because of climate change. And that's why we asking President Biden to hold back on these fossil fuels. He have a choice, either the industry or the people. If we voted for him, we put him in office. That's what I spoke about today when I spoke, that he's not keeping his promise to us. He mentioned Cancer Alley when he was on his campaign trail. He mentioned St. James Parish, and he won't even come to see about us. We want him to come here in St. James and see for himself. Hearing about it is one thing, but he needs to see for himself. And I think once he see it, I think he will, with a stroke of a pen, stop Formosa altogether. We wouldn't have to go through all these channels, because he can do it by the stroke of a pen.
And I know that that's one of the demands of the People versus Fossil Fuel mobilization. Yes. It's for an immediate declaration of a climate emergency and executive action by President Biden to stop the continued leasing of fossil fuel extraction on public lands and water, as well as, there are so many other demands at the website for People versus Fossil Fuels. But as you said, this is something that can be handled immediately by President Biden, and it was part of his campaign promise.
That's right. It was. And that's why I sent a video to him, asking him to come and visit us. I've sent letters to him, asking him to come and see about us, because St. James, we are full. We can't take any more. And the people over there are sick and they are dying. I just got a news yesterday that one of our neighbors are dying of cancer, a rare type of cancer. He had it in his liver, in his kidneys, and he only have 2 weeks to live. So how many more people do we have to sacrifice for these industries? How many more? Because if we would have known years ago that these industries would wipe us out, I think people would have spoke up. Maybe it wouldn't have been me, but it would have been someone to speak up. But I don't have any ministers that's trying to help me with this project. Not just one, and that's it. No one else. They have a bunch of ministers in St. James Parish. They will not speak up. They will not come to my meetings. They will not help us. And I have some people that still don't believe that we can stop Formosa, but they don't know. We will stop Formosa. Formosa is not coming to St. James.
Well, Mark is watching on Facebook. He says, truth to power, keep up the great work, Free Speech TV and guests. And Sharon, your work really is inspiring because you are having success. As we said, you stopped that original plant. Your efforts have led to the Army Corps of Engineers asking for more environmental impact statements, which will delay if Formosa gets approval, it's much further delayed at this point because of the work that you're doing. And as I said, I think it's so important that we share these success stories because it is so easy to become disenfranchised. As you mentioned there are still people in your community who feel that they cannot fight this fight.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, Sharon, hurricanes as a result of the climate crisis. Of course, we're seeing more intense and more frequent hurricanes. But where you are, Cancer Alley is right in the literal eye of the storm for many of these hurricanes. That in and of itself is causing even further pain to the communities because of the toxins that are further released when these hurricanes hit. And we've, of course, just recently had Hurricane Ida. What is the impact when you have hurricanes, which are being increased, as I said, an increase in intensity and frequency because of the climate crisis? What is the impact of the hurricanes then on Cancer Alley? What does it do to those petrochemical plants in terms of even further pollution?
Well, I noticed when we had Hurricane Ida that the industry were polluting even more. One plant is called Marathon. The day after the hurricane, I went to go and see an oil spill that came out over the storage tank. They didn't even report it or anything. The citizens that lived next to that oil tank called and said that they had oil in the ditch. I went over there, I took videos of the oil tank, and maybe a week later, they reported it. After I reported it to EPA, they reported it to the public after that. But and I noticed a lot of flares been going on since Hurricane Ida. I did live stream on those flares, and our public officials don't open their mouths. They don't say a word to these industries. So that's why I think they feel like they have the power to do whatever they want to do. But the hurricane had an impact on the people, on the community. Our community was devastated from all the winds and the eye of the hurricane being mostly in our neighborhood, and people have homes are destroyed. Many people have to rebuild or just tear it down and start all over again because it was just that bad. But industry, they don't even offer to rebuild anyone's home. They gave us little supplies, plates of jambalaya, and that was it, and a tarp to put on our homes. I think that's a slap in the face. The billions of dollars that these industry make off our community and also poisoning us while making the billions of dollars off our community, the least they could have done is offer to build someone's home, but they didn't.
Well, Sharon, as I've mentioned, you're the recipient of the 2021 very prestigious Goldman Environmental Award for your work here in Louisiana, St. James Parish. And that puts you in the realm of international environmental advocates who are being honored for their work in other communities. Do you now have a sense that you're part of this global network of communities that are all facing the same struggles? These are international, global, worldwide corporations. In fact, Formosa is based in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the communities around the world, particularly in the global south, are facing the same corporations that you're battling in Louisiana. Do you have a sense now that communities around the world who are battling the same corporations and battling the same lack of governance around regulation, are they connecting? Is there strength now in connecting these organizations?
Yes, I think it is strength. It's strength in all of us getting together and doing something about it. So it's strength in people. People have the power to change things. So yes, I think it's a good thing that we are getting together and we're doing something about it, like for the action that's going on in DC right now, because we have a lot of people from all over the place that's in DC. And I wanted to mention that we tried to go to Jamie Pinkham's home today. We were not successful, but I spoke to him on a Zoom call like last month, and he wrote a letter saying that he would come to St. James and he would come to New Orleans to meet with the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'm looking forward to him coming to New Orleans because he said he wanted to meet with me and one of my RISE members. And we want him to come to St. James and see for himself. And I think when he comes, it's going to make a difference. I think it really will.
Well, there are still several days left in the People versus Fossil Fuels mobilization that's happening in DC. I know you're going to be back out on the streets, Sharon.
Yes.
What would be success at the end of this for you and the other folks who have shown up? What would you go away feeling like you've achieved? What could happen that would give you that sense?
Success would be meeting with President Biden. Even if it was only a few of us to meet with him, that would be a big success. All we want to do is talk with him and let him see what's going on with us. Let him hear our side of the story. And just like he said, Cancer Alley would be on the top of his list after he get into office. And he forgot about us. So we just want to talk to him and ask him to go back and think about the speeches that he made and to speak with us. That would be a big success.
And for people who are watching right now, who may be in communities that are facing a similar fossil fuel corporation that is coming in, whether it's a fracking operation, petrochemical processing plant, an oil and gas well, and they feel their community cannot go up against not just the corporation, but local government that's inviting these fossil fuel companies in, what would your advice to them be?
Oh, to the companies that's inviting these?
No, to the communities. If they feel that, how on earth are we supposed to battle these huge corporations and battle the government that's inviting the corporations in? What would you say to those communities?
I would say people power. People should get together. Numbers count. Get together with all of these people, all of these different organizations, and stand up and fight for your community. You have to fight. You just can't sit at home and do nothing. You have to do something about it. So I would say get together with all of these different organizations and fight.
And you can possibly win, as you did have that win in St. James Parish. And I know you're continuing to fight. And Sharon, it's so wonderful to have you with us. Congratulations on your work there and also on the Goldman Environmental Prize. It's a huge honor and well deserved. So Sharon Lavigne, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And join us next week from Just Solutions from Free Speech TV. We're going to continue our discussion looking at the impact of fossil fuel extraction and the fight against that, the calls for President Biden to take immediate action as we head into November and the upcoming COP meeting around the climate crisis that will be happening in Glasgow. Same time, same place from Free Speech TV, Just Solutions.